Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. 7th President Andrew Jackson did a lot of crazy things. As we know before, as I've talked about, he had a bullet stuck in his chest for a grand part of his life. However, he's also the only president that you could make a case for being a prisoner of war. He was captured during the revolution and beaten very severely by a British officer, and he even had a cut or a scar somewhere, I forget if it's on his foot or on his head, because the British officer whooped him so badly. This later then led him to his very well known and very widespread hate of anything even remotely British. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. A lot of people think that Donald Trump is the first and only president to ever have divorced his wife. However, that's not true. Ronald Reagan also divorced his wife. His first wife, Jane Wyman, filed for divorce in 1948, citing political differences and a lack of interest. Interestingly, on the first part of the reasoning, political differences, is not because Jane Wyman was a Democrat, it's because she was a Republican. At that time, Ronald Reagan identified as a Democrat. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Almost 200 years ago, well, to be exact, 195 years ago, Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, founded the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, well, it still exists. What's interesting about this is that the Democratic Party is the oldest still around party in the world. The only party that might be able to say that's not true would be the British Conservative Party, as it evolved from the Tory Party. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. 20th President of the United States, James Abraham Garfield, was noted to be very, very smart, and he probably actually was the smartest president in American history. And I say that not because he was ambidextrous, which means he could write in both his left and right hand, but he could do it at the same time. In fact, reports say he wrote Latin in his left hand and Greek in his right hand at the same time. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today marks 106 years since President Harry S. Truman was discharged with honor from the United States Army back on the 6th of May, 1919. This was because he served in the First World War, which is actually rare. No United States president other than Harry S. Truman served in the First World War. His immediate successor, Dwight Eisenhower, was a commander general in World War II, and all of the successors from after that was born in the decade of World War I or later. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. In the very start of American presidential history, a lot of people were worried that one state would dominate the amount of presidents had. And it wasn't not true, because it was true. The state of Virginia had the so-called Virginia dynasty. Think about it. George Washington was a Virginian. Sure, there was John Adams for 4 years, but then there was 24 straight years of a Virginian. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today is the 8th of May. Happy Victory Day. Today marks 80 years since the surrender of Nazi Germany in World War II. The honors of announcing this to the American people fell on the president, Harry S. Truman, who, yes, was stoked that Nazi Germany surrendered, but was even more stoked that it was on his birthday. That's right, the 8th of May, 1945, was Harry S. Truman's 61st birthday, and he had the honor of announcing the surrender of his main adversary on his birthday. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 23rd President, Benjamin Harrison, who may or may not be best known for being the guy in between Grover Cleveland, was also pretty well hated the job. He didn't really like being president. In fact, he cut his day short at noon. This was because he wanted to spend more time with his children and grandchildren who also resided at the White House. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. First President George Washington actually didn't serve a full 8 years. He became president on the 30th of April, 1789, and per usual at the time left office on the 4th of March, 1797. This means that he technically didn't serve a full 8 years. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. A couple days ago, we talked about how Benjamin Harrison cut his days short at noon to spend more time with his kids and grandkids who also resided at the White House. But now I'm going to tell you that President Harrison was kind of scared of electricity, and I don't blame him. It was very new technology, and the fear of being electrocuted was very real. So he went to bed on with the lights on, which I can respect. The monsters are out for you. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Despite being one of the main founding fathers and actually represented British soldiers in a case because no one was willing to represent them, John Adams signed one of the worst laws in American, at least the early American history, basically signing away freedoms designated in the Constitution. Basically, he said, hey, if I don't agree with you, I can legally make you go bye-bye. Right? One of the laws that he signed in the Alien and Sedition Acts was, I forget what the name was, but he was able to deport any person that he thought was dangerous. Unfortunately, that law is still on the book and is used by the Trump administration to do his deportations. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. 7th President Andrew Jackson was really poor. In fact, he was the only president, well, not the only, but the first president that was pretty poor. His first 6 predecessors were very rich, very elite, very high class, but Andrew Jackson was very, very low class. As a result of this, we're not 100% sure where he was born. We know with 100% certainty that he was born in the Waxhaw region, but the Waxhaw region is in both North and South Carolina, so we can't really say where he was born for sure, but most evidence points to him being born in the southern half of the Carolinas. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Back in January, at the end of January, I was talking about how the 13th president, Millard Fillmore, married his teacher. What I failed to mention was that, well, the age gap wasn't as bad as you'd think. I mean, marrying your teacher, at least 10 years, right? Well, Millard Fillmore's parents were pretty poor. So Fillmore did not grow up with a lot of money. And at that time, for an education, you needed quite a bit of money. So Millard Fillmore got an education later on in life. So all in all, his teacher was only 2 years his senior. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The second bombing of Japan was dropped on Nagasaki. However, it wasn't initially the real target. Some people wanted to drop the bombs on Tokyo, but when you fire a warning shot, it's not the best idea to aim for the head. So they decided to scrap Tokyo, and actually they were going to go with Kyoto. However, it was not until Secretary of War Henry Stinson said, no, let's not bomb Kyoto. Why did he not want to bomb Kyoto? Because he had just been to the place and he personally liked it. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The first American president to meet with the Pope was President Woodrow Wilson. He met with Pope Benedict XV just after World War I ended in 1919 in the Vatican City. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Third President Thomas Jefferson was the first United States president to have his first lady not be his wife. His first lady was actually his niece, Martha Jefferson, as opposed to his wife, Martha Jefferson, who died actually a long time before he ended up serving as president. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Donald Trump is far from the first United States president to backstab allies. A bunch of different presidents have backstabbed their allies. What comes to my mind first is when George Washington refused to help out the French after the French had helped out the Americans massively in the American Revolution when the French were going through their own French Revolution. Here, check the See More link for 10 minutes of America backstabbing their allies. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. 18th President Ulysses Grant was the first president to have a serious issue with the law. You see, he was speeding. No, silly, not on a car, those haven't been invented yet. He was speeding on a horse, so he got detained by an officer. Well, actually, the officer said, hey, Mr. President, you're speeding, better slow down. And Grant was like, all right, bet. And he did not bet, he kept on doing it. And then the officer again saw him and said, sorry, bro, I gotta take you down to the police station where you have to pay a fine of $20. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes, was one of very many who fought in the Civil War. But he actually was very interesting with his service. He was honored after the war because he was actually a very instrumental part. He got wounded, 5 times during the Civil War and continued to keep on fighting for the Union. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. For most of American history, especially in the early days, a president not having a middle name is actually quite rare. In fact, the first president to have a middle name was John Quincy Adams from 1825 to 1829. But even after that, the middle name in the president's name was still very uncommon. There was a little bit of time in the 1870s and 1880s where all the presidents had a middle name, but there was a little bit in the 1900s, the early 1900s, where no president had a middle name, where you'll get to Theodore Roosevelt, the last president to not have a middle name, born in 1858. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. President George Herbert Walker Bush, if I'm getting this right, 41st president, hated broccoli. Very famously, did not like broccoli. In fact, he said that he would never eat a dish with that vegetable on it. However, the misconception that he banned broccoli on Air Force One is, well, a misconception. He didn't ban it, he just never wanted to eat it. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. 20th President James Garfield may have been insignificant as a president, but he was pretty significant for religion, because he was the only ordained priest to ever become president. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Thanks to Donald Trump declassifying all of the John F. Kennedy assassination files, we now know that about 25 minutes before John F. Kennedy was shot, a British newspaper station was called expecting big news out of the United States. What that means will be a mystery probably, but it's fun to think about. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Back in 1969, 2 years before he became the governor, Jimmy Carter was about to give a speech at the Lions Club when one of the, guests there notified Jimmy Carter that there was a beaming white object above the moon. Jimmy Carter swore that this was a UFO, and he claimed that aliens were real because of this one sighting in 1969, all the way up until his death in 2024. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The United States of America does not have an official recognized language passed by Congress. So this means technically you could go into US government and speak any language you want, although I doubt that's gonna happen. This is evident with the 8th president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, who learned English as his second language. His first language was Dutch. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. As I'm pretty sure we're all aware by now, the 18th century was not a century known for its democracy, more so of monarchy, empires, and lifelong rulers. However, there was one turn of power, I should say, and that was in America, of course, because that's why we're talking about it. When John Adams became president in 1797, when George Washington left, it was the first peaceful transfer of power that included a ruler that was alive, leaving power peacefully since 1724 in Spain. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Despite being the youngest president ever elected at age 43 and the youngest to die being assassinated at age 46, John F. Kennedy was not the youngest person to ever serve as president. That honor would go to Theodore Roosevelt, who took over after William McKinley's death in 1901 at the age of 42. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Former United States President Bill Clinton, back in 2011, was called onto an NPR radio talk show. Yes, that's how you say. And he was asked 3 questions about the children's cartoon show, My Little Pony. He was asked 3 questions, and he got them all right. So this has led many people to think that Bill Clinton might be a brony, or just his daughter really liked the show. But let's go for the former, because that sounds cooler. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today marks the too long ago to count, but it was in 1911 when the Mexican dictator, I guess you could call him, Porfirio Diaz, fled the country during the Mexican Revolution. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to say that William Howard Taft met with this guy while he was in office, becoming the first American president to meet with the leader of Mexico, only on the second time an American ever left the country.